r/AskReddit, what was the biggest coincidence that made you question the fabric of reality? This guy I went to grade school and high school with, an acquaintance at best. I've seen him in 5 different locations in different countries throughout the last 15 years. Disney World when I was a kid, some beach bar in Thailand, the Bean in Chicago, a pub in Budapest, a library in San Jose, Costa Rica. We've become friends due to our love of traveling, but neither of us post on social media and neither of us communicated with each other our plans to travel. We never talked outside of the random meetings. Now if I see him, it's like the world wants us to have a beer together, haha. I was crossing the street after leaving a store and had the strangest feeling I was going to break my ankle, so carefully avoided a vehicle coming my way. That evening I went to pick up Thai food, fell leaving the restaurant on less than a 4-inch step, and shattered my ankle to the point of needing surgery, and after a year haven't fully healed. My dad lives in a national park here in Australia. It's farmland that's grandfathered in. It's the remnants of a volcano that blew itself up very violently, so it's very hilly terrain. One day we were sitting out on the deck, when we see a hang glider come down halfway down the valley, and it didn't look like a nice landing. Shit, we better see if he's alright. They don't land anywhere near here, so we get in the car, drive for about 10 minutes to reach the spot. We head over to the guy who is standing by a very damaged glider. The pilot is staring at us incredulously. He stammers, "Fuck, Jack, is that you?" My dad, who hasn't seen his childhood friend for 35 years, shouts, "Fuck, Tim, is that you?" They both grew up in Greymouth, NZ, found each other randomly after a glider crash in NSW, Australia. About 15 years ago or so I was playing Counter-Strike 1.6 and tried joining a password-protected server with a few people in it. I typed in yellow for the password and it worked. First try, I'll never forget that. My friend and I were on a road trip a few years ago and needed a place to stay. We both told each other we had a friend in the city we were going through, so we figured we'd be able to crash with one of them. Turns out our 2 friends were roommates and had both been telling each other that they had a friend coming to town soon. This isn't as crazy as other ones I read, but it's mine. We probably scared the shit out of some poor old couple while on a road trip. We were going to my grandmother's, and we followed the same freaking car for over 4 hours, and eventually stopped at the same restaurant, and the same gas station, and only ever stopped when we pulled into my grandma's residential neighborhood. Several years ago I was at a coffee shop with some friends and one of them had an iPad. Another friend went to unlock it and asked him what his 4-digit unlock code was, so I just blurted out 4 random digits pretending like I knew it, and it actually worked. I had never unlocked it before or knew of the same numbers being used for anything else, or his phone number, etc. Edit. Wow, this blew up and has almost reached the number itself in upvotes. I dialed my mum on my mobile when I was on public transport and accidentally swapped 2 numbers around. The person I called was on the same carriage. One time, me and my dad were discussing his friend while out driving at night without many other cars on the road. As we were talking, we pulled up to a red light, and the car waiting in front was my dad's friend. He didn't even live close to there. I passed out after receiving a flu shot when I was 28. The nurse who helped me up kept asking if I wanted my mom. It seemed like a really weird thing to offer an adult woman, the option to have her mother phoned and brought in, so I was really confused and getting progressively more annoyed at her repeatedly asking. Until my mom walked up to me. She had the appointment after mine to get vaccinated. The nurses assumed we had come together, but neither of us knew about the other's appointment, and we lived an hour away from each other in different cities. A couple of years ago I was visiting my hometown and decided to sit on a bench at my favorite park. As I was sitting, I felt something land on my head. Bird poop. After heading home and washing my hair, I went back into town. While I walked around, I watched as a guy got hit with a drop of sky shit. As I was laughing about the apparent irritable bowel syndrome of the birds in my town, a bird flying right over me drops a fat shit on my head. The Jim twins. Look it up. 2 twins who were given up for adoption at birth, given the same first name by their adoptive parents, took family vacations to the same beach, married women with the same name, divorced. Their second wives' names were off by 1 letter. Both served as volunteer sheriffs. Both were into carpentry. Both smoked the same brand cigarettes and drank the same brand beer. Last week I am at work doing a job. My co-worker strikes up a conversation with the homeowner at the job site and mentions that his parents live across the street from him. He also asks how long he had lived there. Homeowner responds that it has only been a few months. He just moved to the city from small town several hours away. Co-worker laughs and says he was born and raised in that town. Then asks, do you know the mini plex at the corner of X Street and Y Street? I lived right across from that. Homeowner looks confused. Do you mean at 103 X Street? That was my house. They talked more, and discovered that my co-worker's parents had sold their house to this homeowner when they moved to the city. He lived there for 15 years, and then sold it to move to the same city, across the street from the previous owners. Small world. Okay, not my personal story, but my friend's mother used to tell this story at Halloween when we were kids. It's got no supernatural connotations and she claims it's totally true. She was visiting Vermont as a kid, late 60s/early 70s, and the power went out shortly after it got dark. Her and her sisters, 3 girls ages 10 to 14, decided to go play with the Ouija board for some spooky times. My friend's mother, being the oldest, just decided to pull a prank on her younger sisters. She asks the Ouija board if someone is there, like a ghost or something. Board says yes. She asks if they're angry. Board says yes. She goes on for a bit, just scaring the living shit out of her sisters, and ends the bit by pointing to the glass door across the room and screaming, and there he is right there, only to shine the flashlight across the room to expose an angry and psychotic looking bearded man banging and slobbering on the glass. They were immediately scared shitless and ran upstairs to tell their folks. Turns out the guy banging on the glass was a drunk driver who has hit a telephone pole, and that was why the power had gone out. He was banging on the door to ask to use their phone. So this one definitely fucked me up for a bit. It's a bit of a story. I met this girl who worked at the farmer's market. We would see each other on Saturdays and chit-chat on occasion. Eventually we exchanged Instagram accounts. Found out we were both into home brewing and fermentation. She posted that she had 40 pounds of apples and had run out of fermentation vessels. I reached out, found out we're close neighbors, and went to pick up the apples. We decided to hang out in a few weeks and compare our home brews. When we hung out, we really hit it off. She had just moved to Boston a year ago after touring with a band through Europe. She had only been to Boston once before in 2013, but only for a weekend to play a festival. Anyway, we started seeing each other pretty often. One day we were laying in bed, talking about a future where we had a farm and were talking about our pet pig Francois. I mentioned that at one point I had the chance to walk a piglet on a leash. As I'm scrolling through my phone to find this photo, I have what I can only describe as a strong calling/energy to check a different photo not too far from that one. So I open this picture that's calling me. I remember that day. It was October 2013. I was outside of my undergrad dorm, enjoying a nice day, when suddenly this brass ensemble walks by, playing. They get to a little platform that was outside, play music for like 10 minutes for the random people who were outside enjoying the day, and then they keep going. I thought they were pretty cool, so I snapped a photo and then enjoyed the music. So back to present day. This picture seemed important. I open it, I turn to her and say, "Do you know this band?" She looks at me and says, "You see that person in the middle of your shot who is staring at you?" Yeah, that's me. I lost my mind. The chance of seeing this band when they strolled by, her being a part of it and being there for that weekend, taking that picture, centering her while she made eye contact with me, encountering her 8 years later, being neighbors, dating, and finding that picture while we were side by side. I've had a lot of coincidences in life, but that one still gets me. Edit. I am so sorry for keeping everyone waiting. I got completely drowned at work today and haven't opened Reddit. I was late to the thread and assumed no one would care, but for closure on the story, I got a job I couldn't pass up in a new city. She wasn't ready to move across the country. Funny enough, the job is where she went to undergrad in, and prior to us meeting was considering moving back there. We still talk and discussed her moving there in June. We ended things when I left Boston in December, but we sort of know that we will likely find each other again. Not me, but a story I heard. The guy telling the story was from the UK and on holiday in Greece. He went for a walk and passed a public phone, which started ringing. On a whim, he answers the phone, and it's his bank, calling him about some unusual activity on his account. The bank starts asking him questions. but he's still taken aback by how his bank knew his location. This was in the early 90s, and asks them how they got this number. The bank tells him that it's the number they have on file. He tells them that can't be right, because he's in Greece, and this is a public phone box. Okay, so the bank tries to work out what happened, and then they realize, instead of dialing his phone number, they accidentally dialed his account number, which just happened to be the exact number of this phone box in another country that he also just happened to be walking past at the exact same time that they called. What are the odds of that happening? Like 3 to 1 at least. My mum and I were heading out for a morning shopping trip, so I was in the shower pretty early, around 7:15 am or so. My grandpa had been ill with a cold, which could be concerning as he only had one lung, but was recuperating at home and had seemed perfectly fine when we spoke to him on the phone the previous day. Chipper, even, yet out of nowhere, my brain suddenly went, "We're not going shopping, he's died." I have intrusive thoughts every so often, so I just told myself to shut up and get on with the shampoo. 5 minutes later, Mum bangs on the door to tell me my grandpa had passed away in his sleep and we need to head over to his house. I don't believe in psychics or precognition or anything like that, and I've never even thought of myself as a particularly perceptive person either. Like, I'm as dense as a brick most times, which is why this still has me spooked 14 years later. I was reading about a fairly well-known cold case not in my area. The woman killed looked a lot like me, and I found out while digging that she went to the same small college as my dad. They were in an extracurricular together, and our family photo album has a group photo where they are next to each other. Edit. Victim was a lesbian who died 15 years before I was born. My wife and I were looking to hire a caterer for our wedding, and when we met, my wife and her started talking about their lives a bit. Turns out they had both literally grown up on the same street, in a city of 10 million people, on the other side of the world. Both had left the city around a decade before immigrating to our current country. They knew the same people, had hung out at the same coffee place, attended the same church. They even used to grab mangoes off the same large tree that hung over the wall of one of the large houses in the neighborhood, but they had never met one another until meeting on almost the exact opposite side of the planet, in a small town of about 50,000 people. I met my doppelganger in Iraq. I wish I had the pictures. I'm white, grew up in Canada, moved to the U.S., and went to Iraq with the Marines. He lived in Al-Rutbah. His complexion, build, face structure, everything was identical. It was so uncanny it disturbed his mother greatly. Sure, out of 7 billion we all have look-alikes, but this one was so close we even had the same moles. I watched a 4-number lottery on TV when I was a child. After the first number coincided with my home's address, I quickly said the other 3 out loud before they were pulled. Those other 3 numbers came up one after the other. My home address was the lottery numbers. I turned off the TV and went to bed after that, dreaming about someone I didn't see in years, only to meet them by coincidence a week later. I was at the doctor a few years ago for a rudimentary blood test. I never normally care about that sort of thing, but for whatever reason I felt a little queasy. I decided to get a snack from a nearby store, but remembered then that I had forgotten my wallet rushing out the door earlier. I looked down and a gust of wind blew a 100 kr, like $10, note out from under a car. I've had a few, but this was the most recent. About a month ago, I decided to put on a movie, but not just any movie. I wanted to put on a random movie. So I used a random number generator to pick a number between 1 and 1000, and I would then find the corresponding movie on Metacritic's top 1000 movies of all time. The first movie I landed on was Particle Fever, a documentary about the search for the Higgs boson. Toward the end of the film, they reference Cave of Forgotten Dreams, the Werner Herzog joint, one of my all-time favorite movies. I thought about putting that on next, but I reminded myself, nah, dog. We're using the random number generator now. There are rules. You can probably see where this is going. I used the random number generator a second time. I wound up with number 463. Number 463, Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Rough time sleeping that night, mateys. Several years ago, I had a husky that was getting on in years. I was very in tune with him, enough that I knew which whines or cues meant which need or want. He had a particularly unique one that signaled when he needed a bathroom break. As he got older, He started needing to go outside in the middle of the night too. Old man problems. Alright. LOL. When he got to be a bit past 11 years old, my fiancé and I started noticing that I could hear him from across the house. Then, we noticed that he never failed to wake me up at night, even though he wouldn't come in the bedroom to get me, just meet me at the back door. One day she was sitting on the couch with the dog and watching TV, while I was taking a nap in the other room. I had sound dampening headphones in, with light music going to help drown out distractions. I woke up to the sound of this dog making a loud enough racket to wake me up. Through all of those precautions, pulled on pants and shoes and stepped into the next room, where my partner asked what was wrong. I said the dog was whining. She disagreed, so we looking to the dog, who made the tiniest I need outside whine. Before getting up and going to the back door, it was surreal, and then it happened more. I'd be outside in my workshop and hear the dog whine. Within 2 minutes, my partner would be bringing the pup out to do his business. To the day he died, I could tell what that dog needed, when he needed it, regardless of distance. Currently, I have a 2-year-old husky that I've started hearing at different volumes than my partner. I'm not psychic, but I think that just maybe, some dogs are. Through a series of weird circumstances, I had never met my best friend's older sister's best friend, despite me also being very close to the sister and being at their house all the time. We finally met one night and we were all sitting around the kitchen table talking. She and I are both major cat people and we were talking about our past and current cats. I told her the crazy and horrible story of how my cat had been missing since the night of my senior prom. 3 weeks prior, he was 13 and I was devastated. I showed her a picture of him and she said something along the lines of, "I don't want to get your hopes up, but he looks a lot like this cat my dad started feeding in our backyard about 3 weeks ago. He didn't have a collar, so my dad thought he was a stray, but he is pretty chunky." It was like 11 p.m. but my friend and I immediately jumped into my car and drove over to the girl's house. As soon as I got out of the car and yelled his name, he came running. He was missing a tooth from a previous adventure, so I pried his mouth open to be 100% sure it was him. The friend lived about 3 miles from me. After we worked out what had happened and how huge of a coincidence it was, my mind was completely blown. The stars aligned so perfectly for me to get my baby boy back. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. Was in Disney in January 2020 wearing a Bills hat. A fellow wearing the same Bills hat shouted "Go Bills" to me. Later in the day, we both are at the haircut salon in Magic Kingdom having our sons get their first haircuts. We get to talking and turns out he lives on the same street as me and my wife. I see him from time to time, but haven't talked much since. Small world we live in. I had a dream that a friend of mine and I were living in a loft-style apartment with exposed brick and told him about it at band practice. He enjoyed the term exposed brick and used it, metaphorically, in a song he was writing. Fast forward 7 years later, both of us living in separate areas than we grew up in all those years. Multiple career changes for both, and by coincidence we both ended up back in the same, different than we grew up in, town. A guy I went to college with showed me his apartment, of which he loved and had a vacancy in their building. But I needed a roommate to help foot the bill. You guessed it, that same guy I had the dream about was looking for a new place to rent. This place had exposed brick and was one of few in the area, at that time. Last week, I was driving my dog home from the vet. While turning onto my street, I noticed a woman sitting at the intersection while her collie sat in one place defiantly. 20 minutes after I got home, my mother asked if my dog should be having any kind of reaction to anything. I didn't know, but after seeing my dog, I knew something was terribly wrong. I rushed her back to the vet where they stabilized her. She had gone into anaphylaxis as a result of a shot she received maybe half an hour earlier. I called mom to tell her and she gasps. We were out front earlier and a woman had to stop walking with her collie. She told us all about how her dog recently went into anaphylaxis. When my brother and I were little, we went to my aunt's lake house for winter break. One of my aunt's friends invited us over to dinner. It was my best friend's family who had family on the same lake and was vacationing at the same time. Was working grocery store as a summer job while I finish up one of my remaining classes before I graduated college. Management was fucking with my schedule and hours, didn't respect the fact that I had class, and weren't willing to work with me about cutting my hours down a little, working 20 instead of 25 hours a week. Was thinking about quitting and went to talk to my manager in her office, where she said, I guess you will have to pick employment or your class. Now go help up front. Next customer came up line. Didn't know my manager and I just had this conversation, and said, you deserve more than this job, tell them to fuck off. So I turned off my light, went back to manager and said I pick my class, I quit. Got that customer's number now and tutor them with their classes, make more, and feel better. I was playing hide and seek with my best friend at her house when a pipe burst in the basement. Her mom got the water turned off and went to call a plumber, but mistyped one digit and ended up calling my dad, who has the knowledge, skill, and the tools for fixing and building just about everything. He came over and fixed it for free. I was at SeaWorld and we were there with my kids and grandma. We went into an outdoor water show and sat in the stands. I was sitting higher up the stands and my mother-in-law was near the front, which was a splash zone. She didn't want to get wet, so I had to give up my sweet spot to have her sit there, and I moved down to the front. Before I could even get to my new seat, a bird flew overhead and dropped a fat turd on her head. Dodged a bullet. You've made it through the whole video. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing for more videos every day. I upload 2 videos every single day.